Hey, I'm John from Bike Fit Advisor. Today we're going to talk about how to best measure your current bike setup. So whether you feel your bike fits perfectly or it fits terribly or you're just not sure, having a written record of the measurements of the bike is always a good idea. If the bike fits great, then having the measurements just gives you a fallback point that if you change parts or if you lend the bike to a friend or you have to ship your bike somewhere or if you're going to get a new bike, it allows you to always be able to set it up in exactly the same way. If the bike doesn't fit well or you're just not sure that it does, you'll probably be experimenting with your position by changing the saddle position or the bar position, etc. And having these measurements just gives you a fallback point. Again, I've a number of clients that are struggling with their fit before they come to see me, and so they're generally experimenting with little tweaks to their position. And eventually, most of them kind of lose track of where they started. And so having the written measurements, again, always provides that fallback point. So the method I'm going to show you to measure your bike is, I think, the best simple method in order to accomplish what you need to. These measurements will get you to where you need to go with the least amount of hassle. So take a look.
When I'm measuring bike position, I like to use one of these simple stands to hold the bike vertical. They hold the bike pretty stable, but I also like the fact that they don't raise the bike up very high off the ground, just a few millimeters. So the first measurement we're going to look at is the saddle height. We want to be able to measure from the top of the saddle to the center of the bottom bracket, or the center of the crank arms. But some, like this Ultegra crank arm, doesn't have a center bolt to measure from on this right side, so we have to turn the bike around. We want to make sure that we're measuring from the very top of the saddle, so we want to line our tape measure up there and measure down through the bottom bracket. It's also a good idea to record our crank length. In this case, it's 170. The next measurement we're going to take is bar reach. One of the simplest ways to do this is to measure from the tip of the saddle to the handlebar. And this is a fine measurement to take. It's very simple. However, there's others that are acceptable as well and will work just fine, like measuring from the tail of the saddle to account for the length of it. We can also take the midpoint of the saddle and measure from there. And another one that I like to do, which helps to equalize between different saddles, is to measure from the likely sitting area of the saddle back here. And when we're measuring to the handlebar, we want to make sure we pick the same spot each time. You can pick the crease where the gap is in the clamp for the stem, because that's a very consistent spot. But also measuring to the center of the bar will work. We want to account sometimes for the reach of the hoods, and so measuring to the hoods is beneficial. So I like to use a level and line it up where we usually hook our thumbs at the end of the hoods there. We want to make sure that the level is parallel to the handlebar and then measure to the end of that level. The next measurement is measuring bar to the ground. This one is pretty simple as well. You just want to make sure that, again, you're measuring to the same spot on the handlebar. You can pick the center of the bar, or you can measure to the top as well if that's easier. Finally, we're going to look here at saddle to the ground. We need to make sure that we change the wheel support to the front wheel so we're not artificially raising up the saddle. And then we'll simply measure from the top of the saddle perpendicular to the ground.
So the most important thing when you're taking these measurements is to do it consistently your way each time. Like, for instance, pick the same point on the saddle to measure from. The main reason we take the measurements from the bar to the ground and the saddle to the ground is by subtracting those two, we get the saddle to bar differential, or how much higher or lower the saddle is relative to your handlebars. But these measurements also help us to account for the minor differences that you'll see between two different bikes. For instance, if you're trying to take these measurements to make one bike fit or set up just like another, there's almost always going to be small differences in the head angle, the seat angle, the effective top tube. And having these gross measurements like this from the bar to the ground and saddle to the ground, etc., in conjunction with the measuring the reach from the bar to the saddle, they tend to account for these differences, or at least make them so small that you can make minor adjustments to the second bike so that it gets as close as possible in the contact points to the first one. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know in the comments below if you have any questions or any tips, or if there's anything you do that's a little different that helps you with recording your bike measurements. If you'd like, please subscribe. I'd love to have you come back more often, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.